Well, it's official. U.S. President Donald Trump will meet Russian President Vladimir Putin on July 16th in Helsinki. Now, the Finnish capital has been the site of previous summits between the superpowers, dating back to Gerald Ford's discussion with the then Soviet Union's Leonid Brezhnev in the 1970s. This will be the third face-to-face encounter with Putin since Trump became president, but it will be the first exclusive summit between them. What's on the agenda, what's the risks, and what is at stake for both? Well, we're going to be going to Washington to speak with John Herbst. He's director of the Eurasia Center of the Atlantic Council and a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. But first, let's go to London and speak with former Kremlin advisor Alexander Nekrassov. And Alex, difficult always to know what President Trump's intentions are, but Vladimir Putin, what does he want out of this meeting with the U.S. president?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that it's good when leaders of two nuclear superpowers meet. So that's one achievement already. Now, to say that there is already an agenda that Putin wants to use, I think is premature. First of all, President Trump is a leader that can pull off some unexpected surprises. So you have to be really very careful with him. He might say one thing today, and then tomorrow he will change his mind. So I think that the idea is for the two leaders, for the first time ever actually, to have a proper summit, not just something in the background of some other meeting. And I think they will have enough time to touch on some very important issues, such as, of course, the Middle East, such as Ukraine. Ukraine, by the way, is potentially can create a crisis that can quickly grow into a third world war in Europe. So this is a very important subject. Well, of course, terrorism and nuclear arms is another two subjects. So basically, they have a lot to talk about. But I think what I find quite remarkable is that already the Western press is coming out with some pretty silly, I would say, forecasts and saying, oh, Trump can use this summit to undermine NATO, or can use this summit to weaken America's NATO allies, and so on. I think it's just, it's unbelievable that the media thinks in these Cold War cliches and can't get out of this vicious circle.
All right, well, let's put the media aside for a moment to talk about the issues at hand. John, of all those issues, Alexander just laid out many of them. There's the North Korea potential eventual nuclear deal. There's Ukraine. There is NATO. There is the Middle East and Syria in particular. What do you think President Trump's top priority should be at this sit-down with Vladimir Putin?
The most important issues should be Ukraine and Syria. Russia's conducting a war in Ukraine's east. And Mr. Trump should make clear that our support for Ukraine will continue. Our support for sanctions on Russia will continue as long as they continue their war in Donbass. On Syria, we've just seen the Kremlin break a ceasefire in southwest Syria. I'm surprised, in fact, that Mr. Bolton agreed to schedule a summit in light of the fact that that ceasefire was broken just a day or two before he arrived in Moscow. But I believe there may be a prospect for a better understanding in Syria, because I think the interests of both countries might move in the direction of a settlement there.
Alexander, what on Syria specifically? I mean, you say Putin, it might be early to talk about his agenda, but certainly he knows what he's doing and he has a very clear plan in Syria. Where do you think he stands in terms of willingness, for example, to get Iran out of Syria, something President Trump may well bring up?
Well, first of all, I think that in Syria, the achievement is that in a multi-sided conflict, we still didn't see this war in Syria become a regional war. And I think the credit goes not only to America and Russia, but to other participants, and I think Israel is also a key player in this. So I think they need to discuss the way they will progress. I don't think at the moment there is a lot of base to touch between them. I don't think anything on Syria will come out of it. But I think that also about Ukraine, a very difficult situation. And as long as the West continues to accuse Russia of being the only party guilty of this crisis, nothing will change. The West has to accept that it is also to blame. for what has happened in Ukraine and stop the silly accusations about annexations and war in Donbass and so on and so on. American diplomacy in this century has created hell on earth. And by the way, Israel is one of the suffering
Alex,
victims.
I'd like to, since you raised it, I'd like to give the Ambassador Herbst a chance to respond to that. In terms of Ukraine, does the President Trump have to take a hard, at least a tough line with Putin on that issue?
Look, there's a war in Donbass because Russia organized it. It's officered by Russia. It's supplied arms by Russia. It's financed by Russia. Ukraine would have taken back all of Donbass in the late summer of 2014 if the Red Army had not intervened and defeated the Ukrainian forces at Ilovaisk. This is well known, and it's just not serious to have a conversation where you deny that Russia's conducting a war in Donbass. The solution there may be politically difficult, but it's very simple. Russian troops, Russian weapons, Russian financing withdraws from the east. Ukraine resumes control of the border between Russia and Ukraine in Donbass. Then the war is over. That would lead to an end of sanctions that are related to Donbass and to a general improvement of security in Europe.
I'd also want to, another point Alex made, he sort of poo-pooed the notion that President Trump could be undermining NATO at this summit. But is there some serious concern that the NATO allies have going into the summit?
President Trump says peculiar things at times. For example, it took him a little bit of a while last year to reaffirm America's commitment to Article 5 of NATO. And that hesitation was not good for transatlantic relations. Similarly, had the peculiar idea earlier this year about Russia rejoining the G8 even as it's committing serial aggression in Ukraine. Then, of course, these things are spoken, but they don't lead to a change in policy. So a certain amount of damage is done, but it's limited because the statements don't change what the United States is actually doing. So looking at the past, it's possible this may replay itself at the summit in Helsinki.
All right, John Herbst and Alexander Nekrassov, thank you both for being with us. For now, that's it for this conversation for now, but we'll watch that summit very closely. Absolutely. Obviously, July 16th is the date in Helsinki. A lot at stake. That would be an understatement to say that. And a lot of leaders trying to get some face time and trying to get a word in with President Trump in particular before he sits down with Putin.